Mold spores are ubiquitous. Mold is ever present. So how do we really realistically, pragmatically avoid mold? We don't. You can minimize exposure, but the best thing is to be resilient in the presence of it. And that is the ultimate empowerment, is to realize that this is part of nature. We are part of nature. This is all by design. And the key is that when we live in buildings where mold is growing, we get a high concentration of exposure. So we want to minimize this in buildings that we can control. But in buildings we can't control, we have to turn to other tools.
Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today we are joined once again by Jason Earle, who is a man on a mission. Jason is an adoring father, an indoor air quality crusader, and he's the founder and CEO of 1-800-GOT-MOLD and Michael Lab USA, as well as the creator of Got Mold, the test kit. Today, we are continuing our conversation from episode 149, and we're going deeper on moving from hypervigilance toward vigilance to live truly healthy lives, along with tips on just how to do that. We discuss how having chemical sensitivity can become a superpower. So if you feel like you're a canary in the coal mine, this episode is for you. Jason, welcome back to the podcast.
Great to be here.
I'm once again so excited for today's conversation, and for listeners that didn't check it out, please go back and listen to episode 149, where we talk about all the things: healthy houses, mold, mycotoxins, VOCs, what's really going on. But I asked Jason to return so that we could go a little bit deeper into what was personally a big issue for me and what I see over and over and over again with clients. And it's this: I want to dig into this idea of vigilance versus hypervigilance, or maybe I should say it the other way around, because usually we start with the hypervigilance and want to work our way toward just vigilance as a lifestyle, but not fear. And so I want to dig in a little bit about, how do we make that transition? What's the difference? And what's your approach to, getting, just not living in fear so that we can have full healthy. If you're living in fear, you're not healthy yet, right? So let's start there. But the last time I had you on is kind of what inspired this part of the conversation, at least for me, because you kind of got caught in a little bit of a less vigilant than your typical state in the process of a remediation. So if you're willing to share that with folks, I think it's also really important and fun for people to understand that your life, we're always dealing with stuff, right? And so even the mold guy needs to prevent certain things on the regular. So, How was your summer? What went on at your house?
Well, I stepped in it, so to speak. Walking down in the basement, and what's that wet spot? And why does it smell like that? And sure enough, we had a toilet overflow, and so I had to pull out the, how do I consult with myself here? So it's always, there's always so many variables, and everyone's busy. And, when water damage happens, it's never convenient. And when it's sewage, it's even less convenient.
There's literally never a good time to have sewage backing up into your house.
No, especially not if you've got carpet.
And down where your kids play, right?
In the kids' play area, in the gym. It can affect it. It's a pathway to the laundry room. The whole thing's a mess, right? And so the rule of thumb on this, I shouldn't say the rule of thumb, the guidance provided in the industry standard, which is called the IICRC S500. IICRC is the International Institute of Cleaning and Restoration Contractors. And so this is the body that develops and governs these standards of practice or standards of care for the cleaning and restoration industry. And so the S500 covers water damage specifically, and it talks about the types of water you have, the quantity of water that you have, and how long the water has been there. And those three variables are the driving forces behind what actions need to be taken by whom and when. And so, there are rules. there are the rules of the road, and then you get into some professional judgment, of course, with all these things. And so, there's not always it's not always a cut and dried, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, cut and dried answer to some of these
You're
things.
very
And
punny.
so it's a genetic predisposition in my family. I come from a family of wordsmiths, so I can't help it. So the first rule is it revolves around clean water, gray water, or black water. So is the water clear? Did it come from a sink? Was it gray, which means it's got some nutrition? So it might be from like a washing machine or movement of water through the foundation where there's got some dirt in it and stuff, but it's not really clearly feculent, meaning got a feces in it. And then the third, which is black water, this is sewage, or it is also river water or ocean water, where there's a lot of nutrition that can support bacterial growth. Notice I said bacterial, right?
Yes.
Fungal growth, water. That's all you need. Gray, clear, black, doesn't matter. Water of any sort, you got fungal growth. Give it a couple of days.
How many other things do you also have to consider?
That's right. Yeah. And that's when you get into sanitization, right? Because a lot of people mistakenly think you got to kill all the mold. You don't kill the mold when it's gray, when it's clear water. You don't need to kill anything. The concern is when we have bacteria involved. And of course, with sewage, we've got bacteria involved, and gray water, we've got bacteria involved. So there you need to start thinking about other things. So what I wanted to do when I had this flood came in was I wanted to buy myself some time. This is not recommended. I don't tell people to do this. This is the difference between vigilance and hypervigilance, okay? Knowing the scope of the issue, I called a water damage guy. Now, I'm not from here, right? So I don't have a lot of resources here yet. I haven't had to deal with this. I don't offer my services on the inspection side of things professionally here. And so as a result, So
you were kind of in the same, although educated and experienced, in the same boat as anybody else. Most of us don't do prior research to find who are we going to call if we have some kind of a water disaster go on, right?
Indeed.
So
Indeed.
Yeah. Level playing field, kind of.
Yeah, no, very much so. And also, you come to these things with preconceived notions about how people should do things. So I asked if he was IICRC certified. I asked if he was familiar with working with people with environmental sensitivities. He said yes and yes. I told him I wanted him to extract the moisture from it initially, and to contain the work area, just to buy some time, because I didn't want to tear everything up immediately, which is, by the way, not what the standard calls for. Okay. So this is me taking a known risk. And so
I live with a doctor, and the way he treats his patients is not the same stuff he does, right?
That's right. I would never tell people to do what I did.
Right.
Yeah. I would
Don't
always
do this
tell
at
people,
home.
do not do this at home. If you have sewage, you have to have it removed. The carpet has to be removed, okay? Because you can't clean poop from fibers. You can't do it. But I knew that I was in the middle of going through. I was going to go through some other changes down there, and I wanted to buy some time. So I wanted him to extract it, not use fans, because you don't want to stir that stuff up. Yeah, we don't want to contaminate those spaces. But I did want to remove all the moisture, and I did want to dehumidify and obviously clean all of the hard surfaces, and sanitize those hard surfaces, and so I charged him with that responsibility, and then I went upstairs. And while I was upstairs, I smelled the smell. And the smell was not the smell that everyone thinks. Which is, right. The smell was a fragrance. It was a very, very strong, soapy, candle-like fragrance. For everyone here who's listening to this, if you candles are really no bueno in homes, period.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be burning stuff in your house without a chimney or an exhaust fan. And so candles that have fragrances, boy, the data on these are ugly. Hormone modulators, endocrine disruptors, cancer, carcinogens. Don't even worry about what's in the candle. Once you burn it, it's different.
Right.
So, you don't even, nobody even knows really what's being produced by those. There's just a lot of unknowns, and those unknowns are not good unknowns. So anyway, I smell that candle smell. I agonize, and we don't have any fragrances in our home.
Right. Me either.
No, no,
Can't.
not, nope.
And don't want to now.
Yeah, no, there's no appeal to it. In fact, because
Right.
clean doesn't have a smell. This is
Ah,
clean doesn't have a smell. And if you make a list of the variables that make a house healthy or unhealthy, near the top of the list is a healthy home is odorless.
yep.
So that means it doesn't smell like a new home. It doesn't smell like a fresh coat of paint. It doesn't smell like a
New
Glade
car.
air freshener. It doesn't smell like spring, Irish Spring,
Right.
or a new
Right.
car, or any of those things. If you walk into a house and it has an odor of any kind, that is working against you in the overall scheme of things in terms of the health of the home. So when I smelled that smell, it was like everything I'd worked for all these years to have a pristine,
Sure.
chemical-free environment
Yeah.
was shattered. So I went down, and boy, it was so strong. And I stopped the guy and I said, "Listen, I don't know what this is, but this doesn't fall within the parameters of what we initially discussed." He said, "Wow, I got to do something about this, the fecal smell." No, you don't. That's not what I didn't ask
Because
you
it
to
wasn't
cover
part
a
of the.
smell with a smell. Anyway, long story short, we ended up having to extract that as best we could, and then ultimately, I ended up having to really hold his feet to the fire on give me the name of the chemical that was being used. It took me days to get that, by the way, the SDS sheets, so I could actually see what it was. And you know what it was? The irony of it is that he sent me the picture of the package, and who makes the fragrance? A candle company. I'm not even kidding.
Oh, come
You can't make this stuff up. And I was saying, this smells like the worst soap, the worst candle,
Right.
the headache. Oh. I mean, and I had a headache for
I
weeks.
cannot even imagine, because it is the one thing that I still, as resilient as I've gotten, if I get hit with certain, and I'm sure it's whatever that chemical combination in the fragrances, man, 3-day migraine. I just can't. So I can't imagine, that's in passing or at the clinic, or that's not in my home. If it was in my home.
Oh, it was brutal. And it would catch me. I would walk past the basement stairs and the waft would hit me, and I'd have this like wave of anger. And I realized that it wasn't so much that I was angry with him. Yes, I was. But I looked at this man who's older, and I see him doing this work without a mask on. I see him doing this work not aware.
Right. No idea.
That this is not good for his customer. But
Right.
certainly he's in there without any protection of his own, and without the thought that he's having this highly concentrated exposure to everything with
Right.
a massive, disgusting chemical synthetic fragrance on top of it. And so I pulled him aside outside. I said, "Listen, man to man, human to human, this is what I do for a living. This will shorten your life, dude.
Yeah.
You have to really, I want you to be aware of this. Send me the safety data sheet. I'm going to send you the data on what's behind that, so that you might change your tact on this." And so I was mad, not so much with him. I was mad at myself because I did not clearly delineate to him in explicit terms. I'm in the Midwest, by the way. Everyone reads between the lines here. I don't do that. And so I was hoping he would read between the lines, but I was pretty clear, like, "Hey, listen, we don't use chemicals, we don't use fragrances." But was I specific enough for him to realize that there's a zero tolerance for that stuff?
Right.
And so,
Right.
so when bringing people into your home, I forgot to say that, right? And I educate people about this.
Right.
So the vigilance and the hypervigilance here is that
Yes.
we can't. Here's where I would say that the line might be drawn: is we have to be vigilant about moisture control.
Mm-hmm.
If you're hyper vigilant about that, then you're going to lose your mind because leaks happen, right?
Right. Right.
And so you can't be worried about every leak that happens, but you can be worried about how quickly you respond to it. And so that's important, because the difference between 48 hours and 96 hours is moisture problem versus mold problem.
Gotcha.
And that changes things. So I would say hyper vigilant around trying to avoid getting to 72 hours on a water damage issue. That's worth being hyper vigilant about, because this will change your bank account balance. It will change your health profile. It may change the rhythm of how often you have to seek detox protocols, healthcare services, whatever the case may be. So
And
But
you mentioned it last time, directly and indirectly, your bank account balance, because if you do get a water exposure, a flood, a leak, whatever, insurance companies give you how long
yes,
in
so
order for it
72
to be
hours.
covered? 72
3
hours.
days, 3 days.
Yeah.
And they will literally get down to, the minute on that stuff.
Oh
So
my
when
gosh.
did that leak happen? When did your water bill start to skyrocket? Like, they
Right.
can track this stuff quickly if, when was it first identified? When did the sensor start, the water sensor, the leak alarm go off?
Hmm.
You know, they're very specific about that 72 hours. And so water damage is covered by insurance almost up to the replacement cost value of the property. Whatever needs to be done with water damage, as long as it's a covered claim, in other words, if the source of the water is something that they would insure against,
Because
then
I
then,
had
then
that
you've got
happen.
they will say, hey, oh, by the way, no, we don't cover movement of groundwater through a foundation. We
Groundwater.
don't do acts of God. We don't cover, a leak. We'll cover a burst pipe, but that same pipe, if it had just a pinhole leak and it was just drip, 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 they won't cover that. It's got to be
Yeah.
sudden and accidental. And so if it's a sudden and accidental leak and it falls within what they call a covered peril,
Right.
then they will give you the grace of 72 hours. And at 72 hours, you are on your own. And on top of it, they also will count that against you as a claim,
Now you're a
mold
risk.
claim. And
Yeah.
now if you go back to them for the second time, usually they'll drop you, raise your rates, or oftentimes bump you into an assigned risk program, basically, kind of like a
It's
drunk,
wild.
like somebody who speeds too much. Next
Yeah.
thing your insurance rates
Yeah.
go through the roof. So yeah, you got to be super hyper vigilant around 72 hours.
Thank you for explaining that a little further, just because
Yeah.
I find it shocking. But then not once I think it through, when you account for all of the types of water damage that aren't covered, and the reality is they don't want to pay anyway. And like you already mentioned, I want to highlight too, you want to be handling this immediately for your health, right? And to avoid those bigger future problems. I'm
Yes, yes, yes.
curious if you think, because you mentioned you were angry and you're a pretty chill dude. I'm curious if part of that response, and I get the genuine frustration because I've gone through it myself, where, I think I'm so careful, but I don't articulate. I just, we're not outwardly, especially in our own home. You asked all the right questions. So you mentioned last time we were talking about like those connections, the olfactory senses and that stress response.
Yes.
And we talked about, the things that can trigger that. And I know for me, fragrance does that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think to me, I can like almost feel that for you I don't have a basement, but if I did, and that, I would be like 0 to like a million like that. And so I just wanted to mention that because I think it is part of the conversation, right? We're going to talk about how do we not live in fear, because certain things are going to trip us immediately into stress, and fear and stress live in the same place.
Yeah. So there's the anger. I've also, at this stage of my life, I've realized that most of my outward anger is actually a reflection of some internally directed thing, right? The world's a mirror. And so,
Always.
did that highlight my insecurity? Hey, like, wait, I'm supposed to be,
I'm the
mold
mold guy.
right? Like, so, in all candor, was that a shot to my professionalism or,
Sure.
competence? So I'm sure my ego didn't like that, right? And then also my kids play down there. So now I've
Right.
got a real sort of existential, this is what I do. If my knowledge and experience isn't useful to protect my own family, then for what? Only helping others. So what am I doing here? So there's that. And then also to your point, and I was going to go there too. So thank you. As we mentioned in our last discussion, we have these amazing sensors in our face. Well, you're familiar with your eyes and your nose, right? Those are the pretty amazing sensors. But we have nerves in our face that are known as the trigeminal nerve, the cranial nerves, and they have nerve endings in the eyes, mouth, and jaw. And they are traditionally associated with pain, cold, and heat, heat, and cold sensing. Somatosensory is what they call it.
Right.
But they also have this amazing chemosensory, meaning chemical sensory, and they can pick up, and they do pick up compounds, specifically VOCs, and most fragrances are VOC based, and they can pick up these compounds at very, very low concentrations in the parts per billion range, which is the equivalent of like a teardrop in a 55-gallon drum, right? So like
Wow.
really tiny concentrations and below the odor threshold. So you don't even need to be able to smell it. In fact,
Yes.
some VOCs don't even have an odor, but still can trigger the trigeminal nerve irritation, which is what it's known as. And that irritation will then send a signal to the brain through this very high speed. It goes straight back. I mean, with nerve endings that are about this thick, with nerve channels rather go back about this thick, and can trigger cytokine storms.
Which
And
now people are familiar with.
right. Now they're in vogue now. Not to say that you want them, but most people are familiar with the term. And by the way, which is the same inflammatory signal that Lyme disease, for example, triggers, as well as mold exposure. So you end up with basically like tractor trailer loads of chemical signals going down a 1-lane road.
Yeah.
And if you've already got that signal being sent through your system because of Lyme or mold or any combination of other inflammatory conditions,
Sure.
then you end up with too many of those vehicles on one very narrow road. And so then you end up with this, this overwhelm in the system overwhelm. And then all these other things pop up to the surface, right? Autoimmune, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the fascinating part about this, and there are many, many pieces that are fascinating about the whole trigeminal nerve piece, because what we're seeing now is that this what we call toxicity is more than likely, in many cases, trigeminal nerve irritation and an inflammatory response, more response to a toxic compound, but not necessarily toxicity, systemic toxicity.
Right.
The big difference, right?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, and then let's circle back on that, because because what happens also is interesting is that there's some studies that show that anxiety actually makes the trigeminal nerve more sensitive or more reactive.
Well,
And
because
so
you're hypervigilant if you're anxious.
Yep.
It's
and
all
so the nervous system, we talk about, there's a thing about psychosomatic illness, which is it's in your head. This is like a really insulting thing to people that are chemically sensitive, right?
right.
But if I say psychophysiological, then we're actually saying the same thing to a large degree. But what we're saying is it's not in your head. It's in your brain, but it's not in your mind. And I think that's the distinction, right? This is your nervous system overreacting or being hyper vigilant, and so you end up with this distinction between it's all in your head. In other words, you're thinking versus it's in your head. In other words, in your brain and your nervous system, and that's I think an important distinction. And so you end up with this negative loop or this vicious cycle of anxiety causing a hypersensitive response, which then of course triggers all these adrenal overflows, and then you end up with more anxiety, and then you end up with this entire incredible loop. And so how do you deal with that? Well, learning how to get your nervous system under control through somatic work and through meditation and breath work, and also certain herbs and minerals and all the things that you can do to just learn how to calm your nervous system down on a proactive basis, so that when these things come up, which they will, your body and your mind are in alignment to say, hey, we got this.
Yeah. And this is the big takeaway for everyone who's listening today, no matter where else this conversation goes, because that is always the point of these conversations, is we can retrain the brain and the nervous system. We can heal. We can become less sensitive. We can break the patterns, create new patterns, which doesn't mean we're then immune to that physiological response, because it's a physiological response. It's a protective mechanism. And it is fascinating as humans that I don't even know how this happened, and maybe you have some theories, that when we think of how intentional we have to be to avoid fragrance and limit our VOC exposure in today's world, right? Like, how come we have lost that connection with clean doesn't have a smell, right? Like, Clean doesn't mean it smells like something for months and months, therefore it must be really clean. Like we're so far away from life in nature
Totally.
that of course so many of us have gotten kind of caught in that loop, whatever the initial triggers were. I think I don't remember if I mentioned when we were recording or not recording. I know when I had a mold inspector come through the house, and actually it was the remediation specialist who came and he asked me, if I had, how did he word it though? But basically we were talking and I was asking questions not related to why I other things in the house, right? Like the vigilance. So, yeah, I had this guy who knew what he was doing, and he just looked at me and he was like, what's your diagnosis? And I said, oh, I don't have a diagnosis. At this point I was already healed and I don't care to have a diagnosis. And he was like, but you sound, I was like, I'm very chemically sensitive, right? Doesn't matter how I got there. And, yes, I'm less so, I'm more resilient. I bounce back quicker, but I still want to protect myself from all of these things. Like you don't have to be bedbound to be wise to protect yourself from these exposures. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of things that brings to mind. First of all, the canaries in the coal mine, which is what we're often referred to as.
Yeah.
There's well, I was asthmatic as a kid too, right? As most people have heard my story are fully aware of, severely asthmatic. And so I was shy about that because it was perceived back then as a weakness.
Yes.
You like the runt of the litter, like the last kid that's so most of my people, I never brought my inhaler out. It was always kind of like, that was a secret. Most of my friends don't even know that I was asthmatic, but just kind of, they know now.
Right.
But and
I say, wow, because I know how sick you got. Right.
Yeah, no, it
so
was
that
not, it was
the
not
wow.
apparent.
Yeah.
It was not apparent in middle school, which is when things really transitioned for me anyway.
Yeah.
Because I moved out of that moldy house.
Well, and so much of what my experience, your experience, listeners' experience with overcoming illness is not visible to the outside world anyway. Right.
Hidden disabilities.
They are. Yeah.
So the thing that comes to mind is that I long believed that was a weakness. And as I got into the industry and I began trying to help people navigate this before I really understood how to navigate it, I also kind of had that feeling when I was in homes that these people were sort of less than, even though I was one of them. And I kept thinking, gosh, like I just really wanted to help them from that place of, I don't want to say pity, but compassion,
empathy,
empathy. Yeah. And then something shifted inside of me, about 10 years into this journey, which was that, wait a second, the things that they're sensitive to are bad for everybody. So wait a second.
They have some innate
this is a superpower.
Intelligence that other people have lost touch with.
This is a superpower. It's a strength.
Yes.
And it doesn't feel like it. And by the way, most of if you watch like Marvel, and my kids are that age now where they're starting to, the superheroes are, they have these superpowers, right? But they almost always have some Achilles heel, some weakness, and oftentimes they're not kind of socially acceptable, right? They're kind of nerds, or or they're a little bit, they're on the periphery, of society, because their strength, their superpower actually comes with this other side to it, right? Which is this perceived, otherness,
right? Otherness. I like that. Yeah.
And so I started looking at this saying, man, this is actually really something that needs to be celebrated. And because, if you've got one person like that in a family of 5, that person's actually picking up the toxin before anyone else.
Sure.
And then being able to take action to avoid it for themselves, so then reducing the likelihood of additional long-term health consequences, but then also being able to make that change for the benefit of their family. So I started feeling not bad for them and for myself, but saying, shoot, like we need to maybe start boosting these people in the sense of like, hey, listen, this is good news. Like now the question is, how do you take that sensitivity and reframe it, which is kind of what we're talking about now,
Yes.
into this strength. And this often happens when you get a remediation, by the way, where a remediation gets affected, the person who is the most sensitive gets better, and then suddenly the other four people who didn't think they were sick suddenly are sleeping through
Are
the night. They're
figuring,
not
right.
they're not blowing their nose every
Yeah.
15 minutes. They're not, having emotional dysregulation at the drop of a hat. So like, suddenly those people realize that their baseline idea of health had been shifted so low that they thought that was normal. They thought they were okay, but suddenly now they're better. And that can heal the whole family. And that also gives
Yes.
credence to the sensitive person who now is the sort of, now
They're the
they
mold
deserve,
dog.
right? They're the leader of the environmental crusade. And so, it gives them that sense of purpose instead of this thing where they feel like they have to suppress those signals and suppress their responses and reactions to their own family. And so the beginning of the reframing, I think, when it comes from hypervigilance to vigilance, is around that getting and being validated. I think helps a lot. And
Yes.
so, being hypervigilant is kind of like, when you're never being listened to, you kind of have to yell and scream all the time because no one listens to you otherwise. And so if you suddenly are validated and you go, hey, doesn't work for me, like maybe, maybe we should make an adjustment here, you can start to tamp that down and then start focusing on what's practical,
Yes.
what's attainable, and then what's also measurable to some degree, even though a lot of this is
like SMART goals. Yeah.
Yeah, they're basically SMART goals. And, the realistic part is also really important because, if you can't get the contractor out because you live in you have to surrender to some of these things, and you have to,
Right.
you have to also become self-empowered enough to be able to take certain actions on your own and not necessarily have to turn everything over to a third party. And that means getting educated around this stuff, which is what this conversation is really all about.
Absolutely. And ultimately that education is the first and the biggest step to lead to the empowerment, which is why we're here, really.
That's right. Yeah.
Which I love. And again, I want to highlight, like, hey, even Jason, because there is also this, like, you were dealing with a professional who had the knowledge and certifications you would recommend people look for, right? There is the kind of that fine line too of assuming everybody else is an idiot, right? Like, so we're going to have the coulda, woulda, shoulda happen sometimes. Where, I mean, I keep, even at the clinic, I haven't made it a thing, and now I will because I feel empowered from this conversation. I know there are a lot of functional medicine clinics out there that ask you, please do not come to the clinic with any fragrance on whatsoever. And we've never made it a rule. And 2 days ago, I was at the clinic. I was working. I was not working in that moment. I wasn't with a client. But I was in my office, and one of the girls came up and she said, I'm shutting your door because you're going to get sick, and it's not, the interesting thing is this is actually a new employee. He doesn't even know me well, but I guess has heard me kind of scurry away or avoid certain people if they come in wearing, and I'm going to say fragrance instead of perfume. Sometimes it's a hand cream. You mentioned candle. We had an employee, and it's interesting because I never noticed it on her person. I inherited a computer bag and a bank deposit envelope holder, one of those little like foamy synthetic thingies, from her, that I literally had the deposit book. I was able to ozonate to eventually just even be able to, the computer I had to get rid of. So not even just the computer case, the laptop. And and she has a little boy, and I'm thinking, what must her home smell like? And it was whatever you want to call, whatever that means to you, that candle fragrance, that plug-in fragrance, I cannot even, I tried to get this laptop to not, it was the innards of the laptop.
Wow. That
I've never experienced anything like that before. But so thank you. This is, a personal win. You've empowered me to no, I am going to train patients and let them know that they are not welcome in the clinic with fragrance on. And it can start a great conversation to educate them
Yes.
as to why, right? Why?
Not uncommon though, by the way. I know Dr. Ray, who passed away a couple few years ago, had very clear all over the place, on the emails, you know,
Yeah, appointment
no dryer
reminders.
sheets. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Like
Yeah.
literally, like if you're gonna,
Yeah.
and by the way, if you're coming in here for environmental wellness and you're still using that stuff, that might be
Most
the
people
first
are
check.
until they learn,
Yeah.
right? Which again is why we're talking and encouraging, like, educate yourself. And it's okay if people who don't understand get offended, because I've been through this where I'm not saying you smell bad or I don't like your choice of
Yep.
scent. That has nothing to do with it. It's that I go into that stress response state and I know where it can lead and I know the impact. Oh,
Well, this brings up two different little anecdotes that would be, since we're talking about how Jason moves through the world when it comes to this stuff. Number one is Ubers. Ubers and
oh,
air.
can we start an Uber slash a travel Uber slash Airbnb fragrance free company? I think it would do really well. I
Yeah,
really
or
do.
how about this? Like a petition, like
Yeah.
change.org or something like that for
Or
for Uber and Airbnb, and say, hey guys, listen, like there's a big percentage of the
yes.
population who, by the way, like to travel and that have to travel for business, that are affluent and that are aware, and you don't want to lose this group.
Right.
And so yeah,
Or when
Uber
are
and
they going to
Airbnb.
make it? You could do share a ride, you could do XL, you could do all the different, make the choices on Uber. Why can't you do fragrance free? I
Yep,
have gotten out of a car, because windows down wasn't enough. One time
me
when
too.
I was in California, actually, I think it was the trip where I met you the first time. We were in Beverly Hills, and I was with a friend of mine who was as equally chemically sensitive and on the good end of her healing journey. And we just both looked at each other and I was like, actually, pull over. I couldn't do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's
Yeah.
not uncommon, and I find that it's in 90% of the Ubers that I'm in.
And it's not, it seems to be, I mean, this particular one, I think we counted had 5 air fresheners in it.
like what
Why?
end?
What are you doing that smells that bad?
Yeah,
And like you said, even with the poop, like, it's any fragrance on top of another smell, you just smell both. It's
yeah,
like the early teenage boy who still has BO, but he's wearing, Axe or whatever. And it's like, oh, two bad, two bad smells.
yeah. No, we don't need that. You go and you smell the sweat socks and the. So I stopped just short of bringing a carbon mask with me because I mostly
Are
just
there
open the
times where
windows.
you wish you did bring the mask?
Yeah, and I have no. I've been very tempted. I mean, I've got
Yeah.
I'm just so reluctant because I'm still a little sheepish around. I don't want to offend them, but at the same time,
Right.
you know what I mean. There's a certain
Yeah.
point where so I've actually shared research with drivers about fragrances and how they're hormone modulators and they have
Yep.
epigenetic impact, and these are really significant. They have long-term health impacts and short-term health impacts. And the long-term
Yeah.
health impacts, the epigenetics on fragrances is emerging. Go to ChatGPT and look up epigenetics and fragrances, and you'll be like, whoa. Our sense of smell triggers, or I should say, our response to odors
Right.
has massive epigenetic implications that are just now being explored. So I'm not going to roll the dice on that stuff.
Right.
I want to minimize exposure to unknown compounds that are, by the way, not just triggering on an epigenetic basis, but
Mhm.
also there's associative conditioning on that stuff, which is part of the reason why odors and fragrances are so ubiquitous, right? That's a
Right.
branding thing for companies,
Yes.
and it's
Yes.
also, so they hit you in certain emotional ways, and it anchors
Yeah.
certain emotional conditions. I don't want that stuff. That's noise, right? Like
Right.
that's,
You want to be in reality, not being manipulated by.
yeah, exactly.
And to be
So
fair, to acknowledge, because I had this amazing, and by having a conversation, I'm the same as you. I don't want to offend anybody either, but I do want to help people and I want to educate people. And I was in an Uber in January in the Phoenix area, and the Uber driver she had a mask on, and we started a conversation, and I said at some point, I just want to thank you for not having air fresheners in your car because it was going to be like a half-hour ride. And again, conditioning, I fear around getting in, what am I going to be getting into when I get into an Uber? But certain trips, it doesn't make sense to rent a car. And it created this wonderful, she took her mask off. She was wearing the mask to protect herself from the customers that get in the car doused with fragrance.
Wow.
Yeah, because she was chemically sensitive and fighting chronic illness. And so it can, like we all can have these conversations and learn to, ultimately it's for our own health. But sometimes we make the changes to support other people first. And then we realize, like you said, oh, wow, and I feel better. So
yeah, I'll leave you with this one little anecdote as it relates to pragmatism and vigilance. I recently went down to Austin, Texas for Hack Your Health, former KetoCon.
yeah.
And got there kind of late, had a big setup. So I didn't get to my hotel until 11 o'clock at night.
Oh, no.
And I chose this hotel because it was made of materials that do not support fungal growth. That you can tell from the pictures. They didn't have wall-to-wall carpet. They had like a jute area rug, good clue.
Right, over hard surface.
They're thoughtful
Yeah.
over, polished concrete floor, terracotta block walls, no sheetrock. Yes, right? Like all my things,
I want to stay
right?
there, except I guess
Right.
I don't, I'm thinking, but so
Yeah.
far I'd be in.
Yeah, no, I was in, and they also had really good menu in the restaurant with like local seasonal organic stuff. And I just thought, man, this is,
And it's Austin,
this is
right?
where I'm
Like,
going to stay.
yeah.
Every time I'm in
Yeah.
Austin, I'm thinking I finally
It's
figured
my
this
new
out.
home.
I don't have to worry about Airbnb, flip a coin on the fragrances and all that kind of stuff. So I show
Yeah.
up and I walk in the room and boom. I mean, it's the moment I walk in, it was like getting knocked off out of my shoes with that musty smell. And it was just like so dank and so strong and so overwhelming that my heart sank because I realized, man, like I don't want to move my room at 11 o'clock at night. So I called down. I said, hey, I think there's a mold problem. And they're like, how do you know? And I said, do you see my email address on my Jason at gotmold.com? Yeah. Okay. Well,
That's how I know.
okay. So, and I found it, it was in the air conditioning unit. And the thing is that they cycle on and off. Air conditioning, word to the wise guys, anyone who's buying an air conditioning system or running an air conditioning, it should not turn off during the humid months. You'd actually run on the lowest possible setting for 24/7. Because the moment it turns off, you get condensation inside there. And if dust is accumulated, because of course it's an air conveyance system, dust does accumulate in those things, mold will grow on that dust. And so if you cycle on and off on a daily basis, you have mold growth every single time. And so it compounds. And so you end up with this overwhelming musty smell. And they do this to save energy, right? They love to have the AC turn off. Hotels, especially if the back door opens up, right?
Right.
Everything gets wet. Why does everything get wet? Well, because now the air movement has stopped and the dehumidification has stopped.
Right.
And so that's what an air conditioner really is. Air conditioning is not just air cooling. It's air conditioning. It's conditioning the air for heat, for temperature and humidity. And so anyway, I called down and they said, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Earle, but we're fully booked. And so we cannot move you. And I thought, man, am I going to sleep on the porch outside? Because I had a balcony. I thought all those things. And then I reeled it back in because every single time I've ever stayed in a musty hotel room, every single time, every time I end up with night terrors, flipping and flopping around. I can't sleep for like a minute.
Sure.
I'm just, I'm angry. And, there's just all this sort of, psychophysiological response.
Right.
And so then I took a page out of the Primal Trust playbook, which is, for anyone who's listening to this is interested in neural retraining. There's DNRS, which is kind of the original method. Then there's Reorigin is a newer one. Gupta method is another one. My favorite is primaltrust.org. Kathleen King does beautiful work, and it's much more affordable, and it's also much more expansive beyond the typical just DNRS stuff. And so I went and started the positive self-talk. Hey, you know what, Jason, you do a great job. You're super vigilant about this stuff. A little exposure is a hormetic stressor.
I was just thinking the same
I
thing.
started selling myself on
Uh-huh.
it's all good, kid. Like
You
you're
got
going to be
this.
fine. You
Yeah.
got this. You're stronger than you
You're
think.
resilient.
You're resilient. This is a non-event. If anything, you're going to get stronger from this. And so I went outside and I meditated for 10 minutes and I brought my nervous system down, my heart rate to
Yeah.
my resting rate, did some nice breathing, went inside, brushed my teeth, taped my mouth, went to sleep, slept all the way through the night, woke up without a single. I mean, I slept like a baby, strangely, and also didn't have puffy eyes. I didn't have all the stuff that's sort of the hallmark of me sleeping in a moldy room. Didn't have any congestion, and I slept right through my nose the entire night, of course, because my mouth was taped. And I had no congestion. I had no dryness. I had no headaches. I had no sleep dysregulation, emotional dysregulation, and I was fully rested in the morning. They moved me to another room, which was just as bad.
I was
And
going
I
to
stayed
say,
for the
I
next two
mean,
nights.
yeah,
And I did the same thing. And I
sure.
had a great conference, and I had great mental clarity, and I had all the things that are typically where I fail, where my body fails, when I'm exposed to mold in a significant way. And so this is not to say that you shouldn't worry about this stuff. Actually, it is to say you shouldn't worry about it. You shouldn't worry about anything because worry doesn't
Right.
change anything. But there are ways to navigate this that are not just about
Yes.
complete avoidance, because the sort of the takeaway here is that we live on planet fungi.
Right.
Mold spores are ubiquitous. I mean, the I don't know if I said this last time, but they're kingdom fungi, mushrooms
Yes.
and mold produce 50 megatons of spores every year. 50 megatons
Yeah.
is 20 times as much tea as is drank every year by
Right.
the entire population of the world. And so, mold spores are ubiquitous. Mold is as ever present. So how do we really realistically, pragmatically avoid mold? We don't.
Right.
You can minimize exposure, but the best thing is to be resilient in the presence of it. And
Yes.
and and that is the ultimate empowerment, is to realize that this is part of nature. We are part of nature. This is all by design. And the key is that when we live in buildings where mold is growing, we get a high concentration of exposure. So we want to minimize this in buildings that we can control. But in buildings we can't
Right.
control, we have to turn to other tools.
Yeah.
And we have to turn to, how do we get our nervous system and our mindset in such a
Yeah.
way that we can be resilient and ultimately in some cases unaffected. And that's what's really cool. So this is an opportunity to reframe that process. This is not a dose response relationship. I guess that's my
Right.
point, right? This is a much more nuanced relationship we have with these exposures, and it is not nearly as sort of Newtonian that this exposure equals this outcome. It's not like that.
Yeah.
A lot of this has to do with the internal environment that you bring to the external environment.
I love it. I love it. I on a much smaller, I mentioned, the little exposures at the clinic. This is what I do. I catch myself right away, because history, the old pattern, the recording in my head, when I am aware of an exposure, is the like, oh, I play the old tapes. And so now it's that same, I take that moment, I reset my mindset, I do my self-talk of like, I'm strong and I'm resilient and I don't need to be affected by this. I will not be affected by this. And I do the same thing. I remove myself, breathe, reset nervous system, and it works.
It does.
But here's the key is you have to have those tools in your toolbox to be able to pull them out on the spot and use them. So
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, you're not going to want to learn that while you're sitting. You can't. It won't work.
No.
You can't learn that while you're sitting in. Yeah. And by the way, I don't really. It doesn't really work for me that well in like a fragrance Uber, because it's so overwhelming, and it literally gives me an instant headache. And I go,
right.
How many cars are there in the country? I don't need to be in this one. So. But hotel rooms, I
can get out of the car, right? Like
this room I'm in, like right. I'm not gonna. I don't have a tent with me, and I'm not sleeping on the balcony. So
right.
So I have to make the most of this,
Yeah.
And so that there's a different degree of, so again, that goes back to like, there's a pragmatism in all of this as well, but you have to
Right.
have the skills, the tools, the knowledge, you have to practice this stuff.
Their
And by the way,
practices.
that's your chance to practice. So
Right.
you learn it, and then you're in it, and now that's the time to actually pull that tool out and go, okay. And I almost forgot. I almost forgot that I had
Sure,
those
because you
tools,
were
I
in
was
a
so
stress response.
right. I was in that,
Yeah.
and that trigeminal nerve picks that up. I get
It's a
anxiety, and next thing you know,
physiological response.
it took an extra level of self-awareness to realize
Sure.
that I was going to a place that was
Don't
both
want to go.
that was not that was not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
And then after I got that under control and started thinking from a position of love instead of fear, that sounds woo woo, but it's really true. It's saying, and I even said, I love the mold, like
Right.
look at what I do. Like, this is my opportunity. I really try to give it kind of a big loving hug and say, okay, this is his situation,
And we've coexisted for a really long time, right? So
Yeah.
you just told us we can't get away from it. I love
right.
that. This leads us to your opportunity to give listeners, again, a step that they can take, one step that they can take starting today to improve their health.
Well, I think the first thing, and I think I mentioned this when we spoke last, which was, what is the number one thing you can do to improve your health is open your windows.
Yes. Yay.
That is, I think that was my first. The next thing you can do, I think, is this is assuming that people are running air purifiers and keeping things clean and dry, right? So the first thing is keep things clean and dry, and then open the windows. And then the other thing is that, of course, and I'm not really want to pitch my product, but I also
since I did a terrible job and we didn't even mention it, and I just assume listeners are going to take my advice and listen to the first episode we did. But so please.
the reason I'm in this business is because of my own personal issues with mold and asthma, et cetera, as a child. And then I got into the inspection business 23 years ago, and then realized that this is cost prohibitive for most people. Most people couldn't afford an inspection or testing by a reputable, qualified inspector. And so I decided to put a dream team of scientists and engineers together to create an affordable solution for everybody, which is what keeps me busy these days. And so we launched on gotmold.com about 2 years ago with the highest quality at-home test kit on the market. It uses a device called spore traps, which capture airborne particles, including spores. And we partnered with the number one lab in the world, Eurofins, for the highest quality analysis possible. And so using our Gotmold test kit, you can test your air with the same devices that professionals use, but without the cost or hassle associated with trying to find and hire one. And so you can learn more about that at gotmold.com/inspire, which is a welcome page that we created for all of your listeners here. And there you will see that there's an ebook there, which I highly recommend.
Yes.
I highly recommend everybody who's curious about this or concerned about an issue, especially if you're not ready to hire an inspector, read that ebook. It's about 40 pages of inspection checklists and FAQs. It's not 40 pages of reading, so don't sweat that. But you'll get a quick rundown on the do's and don'ts. Again, it's totally free, and we get tremendous feedback on this. People tell us we should charge for this, actually.
Yes.
And so once you've gone through, it also gives you the ability to do an inspection in your own house with checklists. And like I said, you can do your own quick
empowerment.
Empowerment. And now you know what to look for outside, and you know what to look for inside, and all those things. And that's really our driving force here is education, because this is something, it's like teach a man to fish versus fish for him or her, or teach them. I much prefer the latter. And then also anyone who's interested in a test kit can use the code INSPIRE10 for a 10% discount at gotmold.com. So you can either use that on the website, or you can go through the welcome page at, like I said, gotmold.com/inspire. Now, quickly, the test kit allows you to test your air in up to 3 rooms. The results come back within 3 business days once the samples are at the lab. So you get the kit, you collect the samples, you send them in, and the whole thing is automated. And then once you own the kit, you get to keep the pump. And the air sampling pump, allows you to retest again for less. So you can get refills. You can
Which is
test 1, 2, or 3
amazing.
rooms for $50 less for each time you choose to use it. And or you can share the pump with friends, which is a very common thing. People share it with their friends, with their colleagues. If they're a teacher, they share it with other teachers in schools or in tenants in moldy.
Which just goes
rental buildings.
back to your mission and your integrity, right? Of the whole purpose is to get these quality tests into the hands of people that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. And they're using, as people have been for a long time, tests that are just not effective. They're not good. They're not reliable. So,
yeah, though they're very reliable for
amazing.
generating results that are alarming and fearful,
Right.
or fear, like
Yeah,
I mean,
but they're not
everybody,
leading to wellness.
they're not. They're leading to
So
they're perpetuating
the fear.
that fear anxiety loop
Yeah.
that we talk about so much on this podcast.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is give people the knowledge that they need to be able to make better decisions.
Yeah.
And so the combination of knowledge and data is really what we're all about. And so hopefully some of your listeners will find some help there also. And then in terms of like getting in touch with me, we're pretty active on Instagram these days. Got Mold on Instagram. So I have an Ask Jason Anything question post that's pinned, so people can ask questions there. And I'm usually pretty good about responding to that quickly. And then we also take questions on our homepage, which is at the bottom there's a contact form. I don't answer all of them, but I see them all, and they all get answered. Our customer service is probably what we're best known for. So you can go to gotmold.com and just drop a question in there if anyone has any questions.
Which is amazing. Jason, thank you so very much for coming back and continuing the conversation. And I love that, even though poop happens sometimes, we can choose how we handle it.
That's right.
And I am definitely going to steal the psychophysiological response versus, because our biological response, because people tend to, when we talk about psychosomatic or when we talk about mindset, even reframing, there's certain things where, those words have been misunderstood, even if they're technically correct, to mean it's all in my head. Mm-hmm. As in, I made it up. It's not real, and it is. But the good news is we can also use our mindset, our mind, those same tools to shift out of the loop. And that's where I believe healing becomes exponential. And so I just love that's where our conversation ended up, and really appreciate not only your work and your generosity, but your time.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to speak with, first of all, a fellow New Jerseyan.
Yes.
About this, right? But also, what I'm seeing more and more of is that the providers out there who have taken on the role of helping people with mold and Lyme are starting to see that this is a primary path. It's not just an add-on sort of methodology to incrementally increase things, but actually really a foundational thing that maybe we shouldn't be waiting until the end of the treatment for that, right? Maybe we should be implementing that early.
It's not an afterthought.
Maybe this needs to be, because I always say it's air, food, and attitude, right? If you really want to get better, it's all three. You can't choose one. You can't choose two.
Right.
You got to choose all three. And the order in which you do that used to be it used to be air, food, and attitude.
Right.
And now I realize it's maybe attitude, air, and food.
See, and I used to be food, air, and attitude, and now I'm attitude. I actually have said, hopefully a much better coach than I used to be. And because I used to, get to attitude and mindset. And now it's like, oh no, wait, we're going to start here. And then it'll all happen much faster.
It'll happen faster, and it'll be better for everybody, including the people who are not in your office, right? Like the family will everybody. It's
that ripple effect. It's how we change the world.
That's right. Well,
you're
awesome.
So much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my pleasure.
Appreciate it. For everyone listening, remember you can get those show notes and transcripts by visiting inspiredliving.show. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.